This is my second time filming the video. I'm quite frustrated right now, so hopefully by the end of this video I'll calm down. Basically, the lighting was just awful right now. It gets dark at like 2:30 in the afternoon. I can't film for most of the day because it's gloomy, and then if I turn the lights on, my camera starts having these like lines appear. But I think I got the issue, so let's talk about the video. I'm talking about Emily Ratajkowski's book, My Body. Before I even get into the book, I want to talk about the cover. I'm so appreciative of the fact that she didn't put her face on the cover of the book, because I feel like that is such a recurring thing and almost like taken for, like, it's almost like a default, you know, that if you are a celebrity and this is your memoir, your face will be on it in order to get more sales. Really appreciate that she made the title front and center, because it is a very strong title and I think it's a really strong book, and I do think that the fact that it didn't have her face on there made me want to read it even more. I personally am not someone who follows celebrity or like in general models all that much. The one I would say person who I really did look up to at some point was Bihati Prinsloo, when she was at the height of her Victoria's Secret modeling career. But since then, I've taken less and less interest in celebrity culture and more interest in more social media influencer culture. So I would say all of my parasocial relationships are limited to people who voluntarily put stuff on the internet, as opposed to people who have paparazzi or third parties putting information of them on the internet. Which in the case of influencers, you do get that, but I only follow or watch content that is directly put out by them, if that makes sense. So I'm not very much familiar with the whole like tabloid or the world of paparazzi, because when I was growing up, I feel like I did take interest in certain celebrities, but actors and actresses have never really been of interest to me. If you ask me about most movies, I wouldn't be able to tell you who the name of the, like, even some of my favorites, I don't know the names of these actresses and actors, and like the way I know my musicians and my authors. It's like people have different interests, you know? So I'm not mega familiar with how the lives of all these celebrities have been influenced over time by being put under the gaze of, like, you know, the whole world, essentially mainstream media. But for the purposes of this video, I did do some research specifically about kind of the paparazzi culture early 2000s up till now. Until now. And I feel like Emily, in her own way, has a very interesting part to play in the time that we live in and the culture we live in, because I would say she's one of those it girls. So if you don't know who she is, she's kind of like a model turned actress. The first gig that I knew of hers was Gone Girl, where she played the mistress of the husband of the protagonist, and then she was in Robin Thicke's music video Blurred Lines, which is quite famous, quite controversial. More recently, I feel like I've known about her more through Instagram, coming up alongside other models like Gigi Hadid, Bella Hadid, Kendall Jenner. She's quite known, and I would say she's almost like an it girl of our time, because with the amount of models and the amount of Instagram models specifically out there doing things, it's very hard to get to know a lot of models anymore unless they are affiliated with brands like Victoria's Secret. In my research, when I saw her talk about this book and her interviews, she came across as so intelligent and she's so good at articulating her thoughts, which really came across in this book. And you can tell it's not ghost-written, because she has a very specific tone of voice, which really come across in her interviews as well as the book. So you can tell this is very authentic. So I personally read this book, I think about a month ago. I read it as an audiobook, hence I don't have a physical copy, which I think was really good because she narrated it herself, and hearing it about it from her own perspective really felt like you're just listening about a friend's story, you know, her narrating it herself. She starts by sharing quite a lot about her childhood and how she grew up, and from that you can really learn that she had a very supportive kind of early childhood, where she grew up in a family that gave her a lot of confidence in who she is, and they're quite loving, quite, I would say, normal, you know, really nice, really supportive family. Where I did see a red flag was when her mom made her aware of her own beauty really early on, and there was almost no stigma in her family about like modeling and using your beauty to your advantage, which can go both ways, because sometimes your family might make you feel really bad about pursuing a career like that. And on the other hand, which was Emily's case, she was almost taught that women's beauty is something that can be used to their advantage. And I think this shared with a young person without maybe sharing the adversaries or the, I guess, dangers that can come with an industry like this is kind of dangerous. So if you are telling someone who's really young, you know, pushing them towards a career in modeling or acting, I think it should definitely come with disclaimers, and then definitely education around all the things that they might face in such an industry, which you might not be sharing with a kid. Sorry, what's going on? Yeah, which you might not be sharing with a kid who is maybe going into like the 9 to 5 job. The feeling I got is that she was, you know, encouraged to go into this industry very young, become independent at a very young age, both financially and also mature very quickly, which led her to coming into this industry quite naively, and not naive because she herself is naive because she didn't have a good mentor or good education around what she could encounter in an industry like this. So those were the kind of things, because sometimes you get people, like if this was written by Kendall Jenner or Behati Prinsloo, or not Behati Prinsloo, sorry, Gigi Hadid, they had moms and people who were in this industry who could maybe introduce them to the world of modeling and what things, and people wouldn't even take advantage of people like those so much, because I feel like they know that they come from money, and if they mess with them, they will face the consequences. Whereas in Emily's case, I feel like she was very much on her own, and she had to navigate a lot of things by herself, which led her to being in quite a few dangerous situations. One of the things that she talked about was being in Robin Thicke's music video, something that she said brought her to the spotlight overnight. And when she shot this music video, it was done with an all-female crew. They were all dancing, and she felt personally very empowered. She said it like it was actually really cool because it was all women. They were just dancing, having the time of her life, and she felt very confident and felt amazing in her body. So she was just dancing until Robin Thicke came into the shoot, and you know, there was alcohol involved, and he groped her. And in that time, I think she dealt with it really well. I mean, she didn't do anything, but like, it was only much later that she processed it and realized what had happened. But in that moment, I think she handled it pretty well for like what was happening. And then she talks about how she didn't even want to talk about it for this book, because she thought that it would overshadow everything else that she wanted to talk about and everything else that she wanted to share, which I think like interviewers and everyone has done a good job of not putting too much focus on that, because it is a big part of the story, but it's not as important as the whole story itself. Jonathan Leder is a photographer who she had a shoot with, and she went to his place for the shoot, and he basically assaulted her. And then he goes on to publish a book with all her photos without her consent. And she's like, who gave this consent, right? And she looks up all the contracts and everything that has ever been signed, and she couldn't see where exactly this consent was shared. But I don't remember exactly what happened, but I think she figures out like somewhere in the contracts it was there that it could be used. But anyways, her direct consent was not taken, and she had this man monetizing off of images of her that, you know, after basically abusing her. So this was like so painful to read, and I think it's even more troubling to me personally than the Robin Thicke story. And kudos to her for sharing that, because I think it'll be so helpful for a lot of young women who are abused in this way. I want to go back a little bit to her childhood again, or her upbringing, because I do think she talks a lot about like internalized misogyny and how much she sought validation, and you know how important the male gaze was to her. And perhaps if these things were not so important to her, she wouldn't have got into those situations in the first place. And you cannot blame anything for those situations apart from those men themselves. But what I'm trying to say is that had she not been, I guess, you know, had she been told that it's not important to please men like that, and it's not important for her to justify anything she does to anyone, you know, then she might have felt more confident in removing or trying to remove herself from the situation. I don't know if it's possible, really. I personally don't think so. I think when these things kind of happen, you can try and think that maybe you could have done something different or could have done something better, but I think, you know, what happens, and there's no you should never look back and blame yourself or think that you could have done something differently. But also, I think victimization starts very early on when you start telling women that they have to adhere to certain kind of beauty stereotype, or they need to act a certain way or please certain people in their lives. That's what I mean, like that both of those things are abuse, not just what happens later on in life. In terms of being a model itself, I think Emily shares her story quite I would say quite leaves it quite open, because she doesn't criticize the industry, but she talks about a lot of the things that are horrible about it. And in one of the interviews, she was asked, how can you criticize this industry while participating in it at the same time? And she actually gives a really smart reference where she talks about political leaders, where they are very much, open. People are very open to them criticizing the system, but at the same time being part of the system to try and make it better. And she sees like herself, you don't need to remove yourself from the situation. Sometimes you need to go deeper into it and try to fix what the problem is, so that other people are not facing the same issue. And I think it's a very valid response, because if you find an issue with something, running away from it doesn't make it better. It just means that you are removing yourself from the situation, but it doesn't make it better for anyone else. So I think it's a really brave standpoint to take and be like, yeah, I'm going to write about it, I'm going to talk about it. I'm also going to talk about people ostracizing me in public without really understanding the situations, or not being there themselves at the time to actually have an objective view on it. I also think that like the time when she became famous, or the age she is at currently, she's only a little bit older than me, a couple of years. I feel like it's a very difficult period of time to be born in. Say anyone born between 1989 to maybe 97. We're kind of in between Gen Z and millennials, where we feel like we're not exactly have the mindset of a Karen, but we don't also have pronouns that, such as potato. And I'm not saying everyone who is born before then is a Karen, and after that is kind of like, I identify as blah blah blah. What I mean is that our perspectives are somewhere torn, where for certain people you are almost too controversial. For a certain cohort of the population that currently exists and consumes multimedia, mainstream media, you are too much of an extremist, where your ideas and viewpoints are too open-minded and almost get ostracized for it. On the other hand, the other cohort seems some of your opinions as being almost archaic. So for someone that is in the public eye, we are living in a time when there is no pleasing everyone, because public themselves are so divided. When you look at certain generations, there's just no pleasing everyone anymore. And being so famous and in the public eye and having to please such a huge part of the population is so difficult, because no matter what you put out there, it is going to be interpreted and dissected very differently by different generations and different cohorts. And then you will basically, whatever you put out there is going to be hated by someone and loved by someone. So it's a very difficult thing to be wrapped around and really understand. But I think she puts that in the book really well, that there is no pleasing everyone, and everything is not black and white. Everything has nuances, and it's so important to talk about them and not form your opinions based on everything you see and hear on the internet or mainstream media, whatever it is. I don't think that this is anything revolutionary. I think models and actresses have over time come out and talked about these kind of issues and these kind of things that have happened in the industry. I think what she adds to the mix is really the behind the scenes of working as a model and as an influencer and being paid for certain things, and how you really feel when you for one photo you get paid that much, and what really happens behind the scenes. So there was those aspects that were really interesting. I love that she chose writing and the book as a kind of method of sharing her story. Didn't in any way come across as like earning a quick buck over sharing her story kind of a thing. This came across incredibly genuine, and it's one of those memoirs that I would actually recommend and be like, go ahead, read the audiobook, because I love the fact that she narrates it herself. And for the future generations and anyone, kind of coming into this world, I really hope that people will take from this what you're actually meant to take from this, which is be very critical of what you're consuming and how you're interpreting it, and be very critical of everything that you see on the internet and how it's coming across. I think it's really wrong to take one person, especially someone who's so young, and criticize them and blame them for everything that has ever happened in their life, because there are so many other people constantly around them that also dictate everything that they do and everything that they can do and cannot do. This is very close proximity in reading to Jeanette McCurdy's I'm Glad My Mom Died. I think that's also an incredible memoir, and these are the type of memoirs that I want to read more of, where people, they don't try to like talk about their own story as like, oh my god, revolutionaries, like nobody else has had as shit as me, but it's more like, this is my story, and actually this is what I think, these are the aspects that are going to help people out. I'm going to talk about them. So both stories really strong and something that I would love to read more of. Yeah, that's my quick review. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back soon with a new one.